Nathan Cole slammed the letter down on his desk so hard the ink jar rattled. "I asked for a seamstress," he said, his voice low and controlled, which was somehow worse than shouting. "Someone to mend shirts, patch curtains, keep the house from falling apart, while I keep the rest of this place from dying." His foreman, Holt, stood in the doorway saying nothing. "What I got," Nathan said, "is a woman who walked straight past my front door, ignored my house entirely, and spent her first hour counting holes in my feed sacks." He looked up. "What in God's name did that agency send me?" Before we find out if stories like this one speak to your heart, subscribe to our channel right now and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. We want to know how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The stagecoach was 40 minutes late. Nathan knew because he'd checked his pocket watch 3 times standing at the edge of the road with dust settling on his boots and the sun pressing down on the back of his neck like a hand pushing him toward the ground. He wasn't a man who complained about heat. He wasn't a man who complained about much of anything. Complaining required energy he no longer had to spare. 3 years. That was how long the drought had been bleeding him. 3 years of watching the sky and getting nothing back. 3 years of patching together what he could selling off, what he had to borrowing against land his father had broken his back to build. The bank had been patient, longer than he deserved if he was honest. But patience had a price tag, and the bill was coming due. 1 more season. That was what the banker Gerald Frost had told him 6 weeks ago, sitting across a desk that smelled like cedar in judgment. 1 more season, Nathan. Then we'll have to begin proceedings. I'm sorry. I truly am." Nathan had thanked him, walked out, ridden home, and sat on the porch for a long time without going inside. Then he'd done the only thing left he could think of. He'd written to the marriage agency in St. Louis. It wasn't a romantic decision. He wasn't going to pretend it was. He was 39 years old. He had 22 ranch hands depending on him for wages. He had cattle to move equipment, always breaking down, and a house that was slowly unraveling at the seams. He needed help. Practical, capable, present help. Someone to manage the household, keep records, mend the clothing and curtains and whatever else needed mending so he didn't have to think about it while he was out trying to save the rest of the operation. He'd been specific in his letter. Domestic skills, sewing experience preferred, organized and self-sufficient. Comfortable with ranch life. No complaints about hard work or long seasons. The agency had written back within 2 weeks. "We have an excellent candidate. Evelyn Harper, 33, from Jefferson City, Missouri. Capable, hardworking, reliable. We are certain she will exceed your expectations." He'd assumed that meant she could sew a straight hem. He was wrong. The stagecoach came around the bend with a groan of axles and a cloud of dust, and Nathan straightened up and squared his shoulders the way he always did when he was bracing for something he didn't want to face. 3 passengers climbed out. The first was a heavy-set merchant with a trunk full of fabric samples who immediately started talking to nobody in particular about the road conditions. The second was a young couple who looked terrified of everything and clutched each other's arms getting down the steps. The third was a woman who descended without hesitation, no one offering a hand and her not waiting for one, carrying a leather travel bag over one shoulder and what appeared to be a wooden case of tools under her other arm. Nathan blinked. She was not what he'd pictured. She was not what he'd pictured at all. She was medium height, with dark hair pulled back practically rather than prettily, wearing a traveling dress that had clearly been chosen for durability rather than appearance. Her boots were worn. Her expression was calm in a way that wasn't quite warmth and wasn't quite distance. It was simply focused, like someone who had already decided what she was going to do next and was simply waiting for the moment to do it. She scanned the area, found him standing there, and walked directly toward him. "Mr. Cole," she said, not a question. "Miss Harper," he said. She extended her hand, the way a man would straight out, and he shook it because it didn't occur to him not to. "Long ride?" he asked. 4 days, she said. "I used the time to read through your county's agricultural reports." He stared at her. "Your county," she continued, as though this were completely ordinary, has had significant rainfall deficits 3 years running. The soil near the river bottom should still be productive for hay, but most ranchers in this territory aren't using it correctly. I noticed that from the road. Nathan opened his mouth, closed it. I also noticed your outer fence line needs attention, she added. 2 posts leaning north. You'll lose wire before winter if you don't get to them. She looked up at him with an expression that was entirely matter-of-fact. I'll get my bags, she said, and turned back toward the coach. Nathan stood in the road and watched her walk away, and tried to remember what he'd actually written in that letter. Holt was waiting at the ranch when they arrived. Silas Holt had been Nathan's foreman for 11 years. He was 54 weathered and had survived 2 cattle drives, 1 prairie fire, and 3 years of drought without complaint. He was also not a man who hid his opinions about things. He looked at Evelyn Harper stepping down from the wagon. He looked at her tool case. He looked at Nathan. That's the seamstress, he said quietly enough that he thought she couldn't hear. I can hear you, Evelyn said without looking up from checking the latch on her bag. Holt's eyebrows went up. She hears good, he told Nathan. Apparently, Nathan said. Evelyn straightened and looked at Holt with that same composed expression. You're the foreman, she said. Silas Holt. The agency mentioned you in the property notes. Holt blinked. The agency had notes about me. Efficient, experienced, loyal. Resistant to change. She tilted her head slightly. I suspect that last part will be the most relevant. Holt stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Nathan again. She's going to be a problem, he said. I'm going to be useful, Evelyn corrected pleasantly, and picked up her bags and walked toward the house. She spent exactly 40 minutes inside the house. Nathan had expected her to spend the rest of the afternoon there, examining the kitchen, the bedrooms, the curtains, all those curtains she was supposed to be so helpful with. Instead, he found her 40 minutes later, walking the perimeter of the east pasture, with her head down and her hands clasped behind her back, moving slowly and deliberately, stopping every so often to crouch down and look at something on the ground. Miss Harper, he called, following her. The house is that direction. I know where the house is, she said without slowing down. I'll get to it. He fell into step beside her, half because he was irritated and half because he was curious against his better judgment. What exactly are you looking at? Your feed storage, she said. Where is it? North side of the main barn. Show me. He showed her. She stood in front of the storage area for 2 full minutes without saying anything. Then she picked up an empty feed sack from the pile near the door, turned it over, and held it up so he could see. 3 holes, each one the size of her fist. How often do you replace these? She asked. Nathan frowned. When they wear out. And what happens to the feed that falls through before you notice they've worn out? He started to answer. Stopped. She set the sack down. I counted 11 sacks in this pile with significant damage. Based on the standard fill weight for this size, you're losing somewhere between $8 and $12 of feed every month just from faulty storage, likely more in wet seasons. She looked at him steadily. That's over $100 a year, walking straight out of your barn. Nathan said nothing for a moment. It's feed sacks, he finally said. It's always something small, she said. That's the point. That evening at supper, the atmosphere at the ranch table was something between cautious and hostile. The hands ate in shifts, and word had traveled fast. The new wife had spent her first afternoon walking the ranch like she was conducting a military inspection. Some of them thought it was funny. A couple of them didn't think it was funny at all. Pete Garner, who had been with Nathan for 6 years and had an opinion about everything, spoke up from the far end of the table. No offense, ma'am, he said in the tone of someone who intended a great deal of offense. But most women who come out here spend their first week figuring out where to hang their curtains, not walking around the barn counting holes in burlap. I'll hang curtains when it matters, Evelyn said calmly, without looking up from her plate. Right now, the barn matters more. The barn is our job, Pete said. Been doing it just fine without a woman's opinion. Evelyn looked up then. She looked directly at Pete, and something in her expression made him straighten up slightly despite himself. How long has the ranch been losing money? She asked. Pete glanced at Nathan. Nathan said nothing. 3 years, Evelyn said. According to the county records which I read on the stagecoach. And before you tell me that's the drought's fault, the 2 nearest ranches in this valley have had the same drought. One of them is barely surviving. The other is doing significantly worse than you. She paused. That means the drought isn't the only variable. Something here is being managed differently, and I'm going to find out what it is. The table was quiet. Pete opened his mouth, closed it. Holt at the other end of the table was looking at his coffee mug with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. Well, Pete said finally, she's not wrong about the Jenkins ranch. I know, said Holt. Nathan found her after supper sitting at the kitchen table with a ledger open in front of her and a candle burning low beside her hand. She was writing in small, precise columns, and she didn't look up when he came in. You should sleep, he said. You rode 4 days. I slept on the stagecoach, she said. He sat down across from her. Not because he'd planned to, just because his legs were tired and the chair was there. Those are my ledgers, he said. You left them on the shelf in the main room, she said. Unlocked. I assumed you didn't mind. I mind a little, he said. She looked up. Then lock them next time. He stared at her. She looked back down at the ledger. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone quieter. You wrote in your letter that you wanted someone self-sufficient, she said. Self-sufficient people ask questions. They observe. They don't wait to be told what to do. She turned a page. If you wanted quiet, you should have written that instead. Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. He was tired. He was always tired these days, but it was a different kind of tired tonight. Not the exhausted but numb feeling he'd been carrying for 3 years. Something sharper. Like being awake when you'd almost gotten used to being half asleep. What do you see? He asked. In the ledgers. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned the ledger toward him and tapped a column near the middle of the page. This is your wagon repair line, she said. You've replaced 3 wagon wheels in the past 8 months. Wheels break. On flat terrain. At that frequency. She shook her head. You're not greasing the axles often enough. The friction is accelerating the wear. A 5-cent purchase every month would have prevented 2 of those 3 replacements. Nathan looked at the column. And here, she said, turning to another page, your hired labor costs for what you're calling general maintenance. Do you know what your men spent the most hours on last spring? Fencing, he said. Moving materials from the south storage area to the work sites, she said, which are on the north end. You're paying men to walk half a mile carrying heavy equipment because your storage isn't positioned near your most active work zones. Move the supply cache, and you cut that labor cost by 1/3. He stared at her. I'm not saying these things to embarrass you, she said, and her voice shifted slightly, still direct, but something more careful in it. These aren't failures. They're patterns, and patterns can be changed. Nathan sat with that for a moment. How do you know all this? He asked. Where did you learn it? She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. My father ran a dry goods store, she said finally. For 22 years. He worked himself to nothing and still lost it because he kept his eyes on the front counter and never looked at what was leaking out the back. She closed the ledger. I spent 6 years after that working in a harness shop, then a freight operation. Learning to see the backs of things instead of the fronts. She stood and picked up the candle. Good night, Mr. Cole, she said. She walked out of the kitchen. Nathan sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the closed ledger, and the number she'd said about the wagon wheels kept running through his head. 5 cents. The next morning, he found her in the barn at first light. She was examining the harnesses hung along the south wall, moving down the row methodically, checking each one. Stitching buckles, the wear points on the leather, and setting aside the ones that had problems. 3 of his hands were watching her from the other side of the barn, with expressions ranging from suspicious to baffled. Denny Walsh, the youngest of them, 20 years old, and still at the stage where everything confused him, equally, finally walked over and asked, "What are you doing, ma'am?" "Sorting," she said. "This one?" She held up a harness. "Needs the throat latch restitched. 2 weeks, maybe 3 before it fails under load." She hung it on a separate hook. "This one is fine. This one needs oiling, not replacing. And this one," she set one on the ground, "actually needs to be retired." Denny looked at the harnesses. "We were gonna throw out most of those." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." "Mr. Cole said you were a seamstress," Denny said. Evelyn glanced at him. "Can you sew?" He blinked. "A little. My ma taught me." "Good," she said. "I'll show you how to restitch a throat latch. It's the same principle. Stronger thread, different tension." She held out the harness. "Come here." Denny looked back at the other hands, uncertain. One of them shrugged. Denny walked over. By the end of the first week, Evelyn had produced 4 pages of handwritten notes, reorganized the supply storage on the north end of the property, identified 2 pieces of wagon equipment that could be repaired rather than replaced, and taught Denny Walsh how to do basic leather work well enough that he could handle minor harness repairs himself. She had not sewn a single curtain. Nathan said nothing about the curtains. He was watching something he didn't quite have words for yet, the way the ranch was beginning in very small ways to stop bleeding. Not dramatically, not overnight. But the drip had slowed, and he could feel it the way you feel the difference between a wound still bleeding and a wound that's beginning slowly to close. Holt came to him at the end of the week. "The men are talking," Holt said. "About her. About the wagon axles," Holt said. "Pete spent 20 minutes this morning explaining to Denny exactly how often they should be greased and why. Used words like friction coefficient. I don't know where he learned that phrase." He paused. "He learned it from her." Nathan said nothing. "She's changing things," Holt said. "I want you to know I'm watching that." "Is that a warning?" Holt considered. "It's an observation," he said. "Some changes cost you. Some changes." He stopped, scratched the back of his neck. "Some changes are the only reason you end up still standing." He walked away without elaborating. Nathan watched him go. Then he looked back at the barn where Evelyn was now working alongside 2 of his hands, all 3 of them bent over something he couldn't quite see from where he stood, and the sound of her voice reached him across the yard. Calm, direct, precise. And one of the hands laughed at something she said, and then the other one did too. Nathan stood there for a long moment. Something in his chest shifted. Not dramatically, steady. And steady was something Harlow Ridge Ranch hadn't felt in a very long time. The second week started the way the first one ended, with Evelyn already awake before anyone else, and already working before Nathan had finished his first cup of coffee. He'd stopped being surprised by it. He hadn't stopped watching it. There was something unsettling about her rhythm. Not in a bad way. Unsettling the way a clock you thought was broken suddenly ticking again is unsettling. You don't quite trust it yet, but you can't look away from it either. She was at the supply ledger when he came through the kitchen that Tuesday morning, cross-referencing what was written against what she'd physically counted in the storage barn the day before. She had a habit of doing that, checking the written record against the physical reality, and the gap between those 2 things, Nathan was learning, was almost always where the money disappeared. "You're up early," he said, which was a stupid thing to say because she was always up early, but he hadn't had enough coffee yet to do better. "Your inventory records are off by $11.40, she said without looking up. "Someone's been recording supply purchases without noting the quantities correctly. Either that or product is leaving the storage barn without being logged." Nathan sat down. "Are you saying someone's stealing?" "I'm saying the numbers don't match the shelves," she said. "There's a difference between those 2 things. The first thing I do is find the gap. Then I figure out why. And if it is stealing," she looked up at him then we handle it. But I found that most of the time when money goes missing on a ranch, it's not theft. It's sloppiness. Someone forgets to write something down. Someone reuses an old tally sheet. Someone assumes someone else is tracking something, and neither of them actually is. She paused. Theft is the dramatic answer. Usually the truth is more boring and more fixable. Nathan thought about that. Which would you rather it be? He asked. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. Sloppiness, she said, because sloppiness is a habit, and habits can be retrained. She found the answer by Thursday. It was Clem Boatwright, the supply runner who had been using the same tally sheet for 2 months without realizing it had a duplicate carbon copy stuck to the back. Every purchase he'd recorded had been entered twice in the written ledger without anyone catching it. No theft, no malice. Just a man who'd been too tired and too busy to notice a piece of paper stuck to the back of another piece of paper. Evelyn explained this to Nathan at the end of the day with the same calm voice she used for everything. Nathan stared at the duplicate sheet. 2 months, he said. $11.40, she confirmed. It looked like a loss. It was actually a recording error. Your real inventory is slightly better than you thought. He looked up at her. Slightly. Slightly, she agreed. Don't get excited. But it's a correction in the right direction. He laughed. It surprised both of them, came out shorter and rougher than a real laugh, more like the sound a man makes when something is funny and exhausting at the same time. Evelyn almost smiled. Almost. You should do that more, she said. Do what? Laugh, she said simply, and went back to her papers. Nathan sat there for a moment, caught off guard in a way he hadn't been caught off guard in years. By the end of the second week, Holt came to Nathan with something he didn't expect. Not a complaint, a question. She wants to change the way we rotate the repair schedule, Holt said. Grouping the maintenance jobs by location instead of by type. Says it cuts travel time between work sites. Does she have numbers? Nathan asked. Holt's mouth tightened slightly. She has a chart. Does the chart make sense? A longer pause. Yeah, Holt admitted. It makes sense. Then do it her way. Holt looked at him for a moment. You trust her that fast? I trust the numbers, Nathan said. The numbers have been right every time so far. Holt nodded slowly the way a man nods when he doesn't fully agree but has run out of reasonable objections. He started to leave, then stopped. Pete asked her this morning why she knows so much about ranch operations, Holt said. Since she came as a seamstress. Nathan waited. What did she say? Said she came as a wife, Holt said. Not a seamstress. And a wife on a ranch either learns how the ranch works or she watches it fail. He paused. Pete didn't have anything to say to that. Pete never does when someone beats him to the obvious, Nathan said. Holt left and Nathan sat with what she'd said rolling around in his head. A wife on a ranch either learns how the ranch works or she watches it fail. She'd framed it matter-of-factly, but it wasn't a small thing. It meant she understood the stakes. It meant she hadn't come out here thinking this was someone else's problem to solve. That realization sat differently than he expected it to, Tom. It was Denny Walsh who first said what the other hands were all starting to think, but hadn't put into words yet. He came to Nathan that Friday after supper, hat in hand, looking like a man who wasn't sure if he was about to say something smart or something that would get him laughed at. Mr. Cole, he said, can I say something without it being a problem? Depends on what it is, Nathan said. The harness work she taught me, Denny said. I did 3 repairs this week that we would have sent out to Billings before. That's I don't know exactly, but it's got to be close to $8-9 saved just this week alone. Nathan nodded. Good work. I'm not telling you to brag, Denny said quickly. I'm telling you because nobody ever showed me that before. I've been on this ranch 2 years, and nobody ever sat down and showed me how to fix something instead of just telling me to replace it. He stopped, looked at his hat. She didn't have to do that. She just did it. Nathan said nothing for a moment. She see you getting better at it?" he finally asked. Denny's face changed a quick, unguarded expression, surprised at the question. "Yeah. She checked my stitching yesterday and said my tension was improving." He paused. She said it like it mattered. Nathan watched the young man walk away, and something in his chest did that shifting thing again. The same thing it had done when he'd seen her laughing with the hands in the barn. A slow, quiet movement behind his ribs that he didn't have a clean word for yet. He wasn't sure he wanted one yet. Chetty. The third week was when the ranch hands stopped laughing, not all at once, not with any announcement. It happened the way real change always happens, quietly, incrementally. One small thing at a time, until you looked up and realized the landscape had shifted without a single dramatic moment to point to. Pete Garner was the last holdout which surprised no one. Pete had opinions the way other men had bones, structural load-bearing, not easy to change. He'd been skeptical of Evelyn from the first supper, and he'd stayed skeptical through the first week and into the second, making comments just below the threshold of outright disrespect, questioning her assessments to the other men when she wasn't in the room. The moment it changed with Pete happened on a Wednesday, and Nathan only heard about it secondhand from Holt. Evelyn had been working through the wagon maintenance records when she found an entry from 4 months earlier, a wheel replacement that had cost the ranch $6. She'd gone back to the actual wagon, examined the replaced wheel, and then spent 20 minutes examining the axle. She found the problem. The axle housing had a hairline crack that had been there before the wheel broke. The wheel hadn't failed because of normal wear. It had failed because of the undetected stress fracture sending shock through the assembly, and the replacement wheel installed on the same damaged housing was going to fail again, probably within the next 4 to 6 weeks. She brought this to Pete directly. "This is your wagon," she said, showing him the housing. "Feel that ridge there? That's the crack." Pete ran his thumb along it. His face shifted, not dramatically, just a slight tightening around the eyes that meant he felt what she was describing and knew she was right. "We replaced that wheel last month. It fails again next month," she said. "But if we repair the housing first, that wheel lasts you another 2-3 years." Pete was quiet for a moment. "How do you know about axle housings?" he said. Not challenging this time, genuinely asking. "Freight company in Kansas City," she said. 3 years. I kept the maintenance logs." "They let a woman keep the maintenance logs." "They didn't let me," she said. "I started doing it because no one else was, and the wagons kept breaking. After 6 months, they stopped asking questions about who was doing it." Pete looked at the axle housing. Then he looked at her. "I'll fix the housing today," he said. "I'll show you the best approach if you want," she said. He hesitated for exactly 1 second. "Yeah," he said. "All right." When Holt told Nathan this story, Nathan had to look away, to hide the expression on his face. "What?" Holt said. "Nothing," Nathan said. "It's not nothing. You're smiling." "I'm not smiling." "You're doing the thing with your face that is the closest you get to smiling," Holt said flatly. "I've known you 11 years. I know the difference." Nathan turned back to him. "She got Pete Garner to say all right to a suggestion in under 3 minutes. I've been trying to get Pete to agree to things for 6 years." Holt considered this. "She didn't argue with him," he said. "She showed him the problem and let him decide." "That's the part I've been doing wrong," Nathan said quietly. Holt looked at him carefully. "With Pete." A pause. "With everything," Nathan said. 3 weeks and the numbers changed. Not by a fortune, not by enough to save the ranch in one stroke, but the weekly loss total, the number Nathan had been watching bleed steadily downward for 3 years, like sand running through fingers, had decreased by roughly 22%. 22% in 3 weeks. He showed Evelyn the comparison at the kitchen table that evening. She looked at the numbers without visible excitement. "It's a start," she said. "It's more than that," he said. "In 3 years, I haven't seen this number do anything but go down." "It'll go down again," she said. "There'll be a bad week, a broken piece of equipment you can't anticipate. A supply price that spikes. Don't celebrate the number. Celebrate the system. The system is what protects you when the number turns against you. He looked at her. You don't let yourself feel good about things, do you? She was quiet for a moment. I let myself feel good about things that last, she said. 3 weeks isn't long enough to know if this lasts. It was the most personal thing she'd said to him since she arrived. He recognized it as such a brief window quickly closed. What would make it last? He asked. She looked at the ledger for a moment, then looked at him. Consistency, she said. And people believing it's worth maintaining after the initial excitement wears off. You think the men will lose interest? Some of them, she said. New systems feel good at first. Then they feel like work. Then they feel like extra work. That's when things slip back. How do you stop that? You make the new way easier than the old way, she said. So going back takes more effort than going forward. She paused. That's what I'm building right now. Not just better habits. A structure that makes the better habits the path of least resistance. Nathan sat back in his chair. Where did you learn to think like this? He said. She looked at him steadily. The same way everyone learns everything, she said. I got it wrong enough times that I finally understood how to get it right. Ted. It was Holt who noticed the other thing first. He came to Nathan on a Thursday afternoon with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who had been turning something over in his mind for several days and had finally decided to say it out loud. She's not sleeping enough, Holt said. Nathan frowned. What? She's up before first light. She works until after the hands turn in. I walked past the kitchen 2 nights running after 10 o'clock, and the candle was still going. He paused. She's driving herself hard. She's getting things done, Nathan said. She's running on empty and trying not to show it, Holt said. I've seen it before. Men do it when they're trying to prove something. Drives them into the ground eventually. Nathan said nothing. What's she trying to prove? Holt asked. It was a real question, not a rhetorical one, and it landed differently than Nathan expected. What was she trying to prove? That she was worth what she'd cost? That she hadn't been wrong to come? That a woman with accounting ledgers and leather-working tools could walk into a failing ranch and matter? Or something else? Something she'd carried here from Missouri that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with all the places she'd learned to look at the backs of things instead of the fronts. He didn't know. But that night when he passed the kitchen and saw the candle still burning, and Evelyn bent over her papers, with her shoulders tense and her pen moving in those precise, careful columns, he stopped in the doorway. Evelyn, he said. She looked up. The use of her first name caught both of them slightly off guard. He'd been calling her Miss Harper. He wasn't sure when that had changed in his head, only that it had. It'll still be wrong in the morning, he said. She looked at him. Whatever you're finding in those books, he said. It'll still be there at sunrise, and you'll see it clearer after you've slept. A long pause. I'll finish this column, she said. Then sleep, he said. She looked back down at the ledger. Good night, Mr. Cole. He stood there a moment longer than he needed to. Nathan, he said. She looked up again. If I'm calling you Evelyn, you can call me Nathan. Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile exactly. Something quieter than a smile, and in some ways more significant. Good night, Nathan, she said. He walked down the hall and stood in the dark of his own room for a moment, aware of his heartbeat in a way he hadn't been for a very long time. The 4th week brought a complication nobody had planned for. Gerald Frost, the banker, rode out to Harlow Ridge on a Tuesday morning. He didn't send word ahead. He never did. It was a habit of his that Nathan had always found quietly cruel, the element of surprise as a power tool keeping debtors permanently off balance. Nathan was in the yard when Frost arrived, and the familiar clench of dread hit him in the stomach, the way it always did when he saw that particular horse coming up the road. But then Evelyn came out of the barn. She'd heard the hoofbeats. Of course she had. She heard everything. She stood beside Nathan as Frost dismounted, and she didn't say anything, just stood there with her arms loose at her sides, and her expression the same steady, focused calm she brought to everything. Frost glanced at her. "Mrs. Cole?" "Miss Harper," she said. "I'm managing the ranch's operational accounts." Frost blinked, looked at Nathan, looked back at her. "I see," he said in the tone of a man who did not see and did not particularly want to. "You're here about the debt schedule," Evelyn said. Frost straightened slightly. "I'm here to assess the current financial position," she said. "Yes, come inside. I have the updated ledgers ready." Frost stared at her. "I assumed you'd be out this month," she continued. "So I prepared a full 3-week operational summary with projected forward numbers. It'll save time." She turned and walked toward the house. After a moment, Frost followed her. Nathan stood in the yard alone for a second, and then walked after them both, and the feeling in his chest was something he hadn't expected at all. It was the particular feeling of not being alone in something. He hadn't felt that in years. Inside, Evelyn laid out the ledgers with the composed efficiency of someone who had been preparing for exactly this moment since she arrived. She walked Frost through the 3-week summary without flourish and without apology. "Here are the numbers. Here is what they mean. Here is what has changed and why. Here is the projected trajectory, if current systems hold." Frost was quiet through most of it. When she finished, he looked at the summary page for a long time. "This is a significant shift," he said finally. "It's the beginning of a significant shift," Evelyn said. "The full effect of the operational changes won't appear in the numbers for another 6 to 8 weeks, but the trajectory is established and the systems are in place." Frost looked at Nathan. "You've brought in outside help." "She came as my wife," Nathan said. It was the first time he'd described her that way, and the word felt strange and right at the same time. Frost looked between them. "These numbers are real. Check them against your own records," Evelyn said. "I cross-referenced everything against your bank's quarterly statements, which are public record. You'll find they match." A pause. Frost closed the ledger. "I'll give you the rest of the season," he said. "If the trajectory holds, we'll renegotiate the schedule." He stood, picked up his hat, and nodded to Evelyn with something that was almost, but not quite, respect. When the door closed behind him, Nathan turned to look at Evelyn. She was already putting the ledgers back in order. "You prepared for him," he said. "Before he even came." "I prepared for him the first week," she said. "A banker with an open loan on a struggling property doesn't wait forever. I wanted to be ready." "You didn't tell me." "You had enough to worry about," she said simply. Nathan stood there. He thought about 3 years of carrying this alone. 3 years of that weight sitting entirely on his own shoulders, with no one who understood the full picture, no one he could put the real numbers in front of and say, "Here, help me see what I'm missing." He thought about Frost's face when Evelyn had said, "I have the updated ledgers ready." He thought about the way she'd walked out of that barn and stood beside him without being asked. "Thank you," he said. She looked up at him. "I'm doing my job." "No," he said. "You're doing more than that. And you know it." She held his gaze for a moment longer than usual. Then she looked back down at the ledgers. But she didn't argue with him. And somehow, that was the most significant thing she'd said all week. The news arrived on a Friday, the way most things that change everything do. Without warning, tucked inside ordinary conversation, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Denny Walsh brought it in with the mail and a bag of flour from town, setting both on the kitchen table and saying almost as an afterthought, "They're putting up a railroad construction camp about 8 miles east. Heard it from 3 different men at the feed store. Hundreds of workers coming in, maybe more." Nathan looked up from the harness he'd been mending. Evelyn, sitting across the table with the weekly ledger open in front of her, went very still. Not the stillness of someone who hadn't heard. The stillness of someone who was already thinking. "How long is the camp supposed to run?" she asked. Denny shrugged. Nobody knows exactly. Could be 6 months. Could be closer to a year. They're laying track through the Valley Pass. It's a big job. Who's the foreman? Fellow named Crandall, out of Chicago. Denny put down the flour and left, already moving on to his next task. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. Nathan looked at Evelyn. She was staring at the ledger, but her eyes weren't moving. She wasn't reading. She was calculating. "Say what you're thinking," he said. She looked up. "I'm thinking about what a camp of several hundred workers needs that nobody else is thinking about right now." "Supplies," Nathan said. "Every merchant in the county is already thinking about supplies." "Not supplies," she said. "Repair." He waited. "A railroad construction camp runs heavy equipment around the clock," she said, leaning forward slightly, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Nathan heard something in her voice that wasn't quite the same, steady, composed certainty she always carried. There was an edge beneath it. Not urgency exactly, but aliveness. Wagons, tents, harnesses, tool assemblies, rigging equipment. Mechanical components that get used hard every single day in rough terrain conditions. Every piece of that breaks down. Constantly. She pressed her palm flat on the table. And when it breaks, they don't have time to send it back to Chicago. They need someone local who can fix it fast and fix it right. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "We're a cattle ranch," he said. "We're a cattle ranch with a harness shop, a repair crew. I've spent 4 weeks training a leather worker in Denny who is better than he knows, and 4 weeks of documented maintenance work that proves we know what we're doing." She paused. "And we're 8 miles away instead of 8 hours. He looked at her. "You want to pitch the railroad a maintenance contract?" "I want to pitch the railroad a maintenance contract," she confirmed, "before anyone else thinks of it." "What makes you think nobody else has thought of it?" "Because everybody else is thinking about selling them flour and nails," she said. "Which is the obvious answer. The obvious answer is always crowded." Nathan sat back in his chair. The ranch had been improving. Steady, real improvement, the kind that showed up in the numbers every week without dramatic swings. Frost had ridden back out 10 days after his first visit, reviewed the updated ledger without being invited, and left without saying much, which Nathan had learned to read as a positive sign. The debt wasn't gone. But the bleeding had slowed to something manageable, and manageable was something Nathan hadn't believed in for 3 years. Now Evelyn was looking at him with that direct, level gaze, and talking about a railroad contract like it was the next logical step in a plan she'd been building toward since she arrived. Maybe she had been. "There's risk," he said. "There's always risk," she said. "What's the specific risk you're worried about?" "That we take on a contract we can't fulfill and burn whatever goodwill we've built," he said. "Frost just gave us room to breathe. If we overextend..." "We won't overextend," she said. "I won't let us take on more than we can handle. I'll negotiate a trial contract first, a limited scope, 2 or 3 weeks specific deliverables. If we can't perform, we say so and walk away before it costs us. If we can..." She stopped. Let him finish it. "If we can..." Nathan said slowly, "Everything changes." "Everything changes," she agreed. "She is." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something almost frightening about the clarity of her, the way she could see a thing fully formed when everyone else was still sorting out the general shape of it. "When do you want to go?" he said. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Before word gets around and someone else has the same idea." "I'll ride with you," he said. She shook her head. "I need to go alone." He started to object. "Nathan," she said, and the directness in her voice stopped him. "If you come with me, he'll talk to you. He'll assume you're the one with the proposition and I'm the one who came along. And then we'll spend half our time fighting that assumption instead of making our case." He knew she was right. He didn't like it, but he knew it. "What if he won't see you?" he said. "He'll see me," she said. "Or I'll wait until he does." She left at first light Saturday. Nathan was in the yard when she rode out, watching her go with his coffee going cold in his hand and a feeling in his chest that he couldn't quite name. Part of it was practical, the rational understanding that this mattered, that the outcome of this single conversation could shift the trajectory of everything they'd built over the past month. But part of it was something else, something quieter and more personal, the particular feeling of watching someone walk towards something hard on your behalf, knowing there's nothing you can do but wait. Holt came up beside him. "She'll be fine," Holt said. "I didn't say anything." "You've been standing here for 10 minutes staring at the road," Holt said. "You didn't need to say anything." Nathan drank his cold coffee and said nothing. "You know what I've noticed," Holt said after a moment. "I'm sure you're going to tell me." "She never talks about what she wants," Holt said. "Not once in 4 weeks. She talks about what the ranch needs, what the numbers say, what the systems require." He paused. "Never once what Evelyn Harper actually wants out of any of this." Nathan looked at him. "I'm just saying," Holt said. "Worth thinking about." He walked away, leaving Nathan standing with an empty cup and a thought he hadn't finished forming yet. She was back by early afternoon. Nathan heard the horse and was in the yard before he'd consciously decided to be there. When Evelyn dismounted, he read her face before she said a word, and her face told him exactly nothing. She'd kept it as composed and controlled as always, which meant he couldn't tell if it had gone well or badly until she spoke. "He saw me," she said. "And he made me wait 2 hours first," she said, handing off the horse. "I waited. And then," she looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes, not quite humor, but adjacent to it. "He thought I was there to sell him fabric," she said. "What did you say?" "I said that was a reasonable assumption, and that I understood why he'd made it, and then I asked him to walk me across his equipment yard." Nathan stared at her. "He did it. He did it to humor me," she said. "He stopped humoring me about 30 seconds in." She walked toward the house and he followed. "Tell me," he said. "His main freight wagon has a wheel assembly that's showing the exact same stress pattern as Pete's wagon did last month," she said. "2 of his tent frame structures have load-bearing joints that are improperly seated. They'll collapse in high wind. His primary harness set for the draft horses has a throat latch that's been repaired with the wrong thread weight. It'll hold under normal load but fail under heavy pull." She stopped at the door and turned to face him. "I told him all of this, standing in his own yard looking at his own equipment. Not from a catalog, not from a pitch letter, from 30 seconds of walking and looking." Nathan felt something rise in his chest. "What did he say?" he said. "He said, 'Prove it,'" she said. "About the wheel assembly. So I showed him the stress fracture, same technique I used with Pete. He called over his head mechanic. The mechanic looked at it and said, 'She's right.'" The words hung in the air between them. "He offered a trial contract," Evelyn said. 2 weeks. Harness maintenance and wagon assessment for the primary work fleet. If we perform, we discuss a longer arrangement." Nathan breathed out. "That's," he started. "It's a trial," she said quickly. "Not a contract. Don't celebrate yet." "Evelyn." She stopped. "Let me have 30 seconds, he said. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted that same quiet thing that wasn't quite a smile, but was warmer than her usual composure. 30 seconds, she said. He nodded slowly, looking at her, letting the weight of what she'd done settle fully into his chest. "All right," he said. "Now let's talk about what we need to make this work." The next 10 days were the hardest and the most alive the ranch had felt since Nathan could remember. Evelyn restructured the work rotation entirely, pulling Denny and 2 of the more mechanically capable hands onto the railroad work while keeping the core cattle operation running with the remaining crew. She drew up a maintenance protocol for the railroad fleet, broke it into daily task assignments, and briefed every man on his specific responsibilities with the same calm precision she'd brought to everything since her first day. Pete Garner, who had once questioned why a woman was interfering in ranch business, was now effectively her second-in-command on the repair operation. Nobody remarked on this out loud. It had happened too gradually and too naturally for anyone to make a speech about it. On the third day of the trial, the head mechanic at the railroad camp, a thick-shouldered man named Briggs, who had initially watched Evelyn with open skepticism, came to her with a problem. One of the heavy freight wagons had developed a grinding noise in the left rear axle. The camp's own men had looked at it and couldn't isolate the source. Evelyn looked at it for 4 minutes. "Your inner bearing race has a flat spot," she said. "Probably happened during the last river crossing, a sharp impact at the wrong angle. It's not catastrophic yet, but under full load on rough terrain, it'll worsen fast. You'll want to replace the race before the weekend run." Briggs stared at her. "How do you even—" "The grinding changes pitch under different load conditions," she said. "If it were the outer race, it'd be consistent. The variation means it's inner, which means impact damage rather than wear." She looked up at him. "Do you have a replacement in your parts inventory?" Briggs blinked. "Yeah," he said. "We do." "Good," she said. "I can walk your man through the replacement if he hasn't done it before." Briggs was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been doing this?" he said. "Doing what?" "Looking at broken things and knowing what's wrong with them." She considered the question with the same seriousness she gave everything. "Since I was about 16, she said. "My father's store had an old delivery wagon. Nobody could figure out why one wheel kept loosening. I figured it out." She paused. "Wrong bolt thread for the hub size. 5-minute fix once you knew what to look for." Briggs looked at her for a long moment. "Crandall doesn't know what he's got," he said. "Crandall gave us a trial contract," she said. "That's enough for now." Back at the ranch that evening, Nathan found Evelyn at the kitchen table, her usual spot, her usual candle. But tonight, she wasn't writing in the ledger. She was sitting with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup, staring at nothing. He sat down across from her. "Hard day?" he asked. She looked up. For a moment, her face was unguarded in a way it rarely was. The composure pulled back just far enough that he could see the tiredness beneath it. "Good day," she said, "but a hard one. Tell me the hard part." She was quiet for a moment. "Briggs asked his junior mechanic to shadow me this afternoon," she said, "to learn the assessment process." A pause. "The mechanic is 22 years old. He looked at me the entire time like he wasn't sure whether to take notes or argue with everything I said." "Did he argue?" "Once," she said. "About the bearing diagnosis. He had a different theory." "Was he right?" "No," she said. "But he wasn't entirely wrong either. His reasoning was sound, just incomplete." She paused. "So I told him that his logic was good and here's what he was missing." And he stopped arguing and started listening. Nathan watched her. "You could have just overruled him," he said. "I could have," she said. "But then tomorrow he'd still be looking for reasons to dismiss me instead of reasons to learn from me. And I need him learning from me. We have 8 more days in this trial." Nathan sat with that for a moment. "You think about 3 steps ahead all the time," he said. "I think about what the situation requires," she said. "It's not strategy, it's just—" She stopped. "Just what?" She looked at her coffee. "When you've spent most of your life having to prove that you belong in rooms where people assume you don't," she said quietly, "you learn that winning the argument in the moment is never the point. The point is whether they still respect you after the argument is over." The kitchen was quiet. Nathan thought about all the rooms he'd walked into where nobody had questioned his right to be there. Every banker, every merchant, every foreman he'd ever dealt with, none of them had made him prove anything before listening to what he had to say. He'd never once thought about what it would cost to not have that. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked up surprised. "That it has to work that way," he said. "That you have to spend energy on that instead of just doing the work." She held his gaze for a moment that felt longer than it was. "Most people don't notice that it costs anything," she said. "I'm noticing," he said. Another pause. Something in her expression changed slowly, the way light changes when a cloud moves the same landscape, but different and somehow more real. "Thank you," she said softly. They sat together in the quiet kitchen for a while after that, not talking, the candle burning down between them, and it was one of the most comfortable silences Nathan had known in years. On the 8th day of the trial, the storm came. It hit in the early hours of the morning, an early autumn front that nobody had predicted, driving in fast from the northwest, with the kind of force that felt almost personal. By the time the sun should have risen, the sky was the color of iron, and the wind was tearing at everything that wasn't nailed down. Nathan was awake before the worst of it hit, standing in the barn with Holt and 3 of the hands, listening to the sound of the storm against the roof and thinking about the railroad camp 8 miles east. Open terrain, temporary structures, canvas tents and wooden frames, and hundreds of men trying to work through this. "She's going to want to go out there," Holt said. "She's going to go whether I say she should or not," Nathan said. "Are you going to try to stop her?" Nathan looked at him. "Would you?" he said. Holt said nothing. By the time the worst of the wind dropped enough to ride safely, Evelyn was already at the door with her coat on and her tool case under her arm, and Nathan was right beside her with his own coat and his horse ready. She looked at him. "I thought you said I needed to go alone," she said. "That was a business meeting," he said. "This is a storm." She held his gaze for a moment. "All right," she said. They rode together. John. What they found at the railroad camp was organized chaos. 2 tent structures, partially collapsed a supply wagon with a broken tongue equipment, scattered men working fast and hard to secure everything that could still be secured. Crandall was in the middle of it, barking orders, when he saw Evelyn ride in. "Your timing," he started. "Where's your worst damage?" she said. He pointed. She was off her horse before he finished pointing. For the next 4 hours, Evelyn moved through the camp with the focused calm of someone who had been preparing for exactly this. Not this storm specifically, but for the moment when everything went wrong at once, and the question was whether the systems held or fell apart. The systems held. The harness sets they'd maintained were intact. No failures under emergency load conditions. The wagon assessments they'd done had flagged 2 vehicles as unreliable. Both of those were the ones sitting damaged now. Every piece of equipment they'd touched was performing. Briggs found her near the end when the worst of the cleanup was winding down. "2 wagons lost," he said. "Both ones you flagged as low priority to us last week. The ones we hadn't let you assess yet." She said nothing. "Everything you touched held," he said. She looked at him. "I need to tell Crandall that," Briggs said. "Yes," she said. "You do." Crandall was harder to read. He was a man who ran things and didn't like surprises, and a woman who showed up and turned a storm crisis into a demonstration of competence was, Nathan suspected, the most surprising thing that had happened to him all year. He came to Evelyn at the end of the afternoon when the camp was beginning to settle back into something resembling order. "The trial contract," he said. "Yes," she said. "It's not enough," he said. Evelyn's expression didn't change. Nathan, standing 5 feet behind her, felt his jaw tighten. Then Crandall said, "I want to discuss a permanent maintenance arrangement. Full camp fleet. Monthly retainer." The words hit the air like something solid. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. "I'll need to review the scope," she said. "And the terms need to account for emergency response, not just scheduled maintenance." "Agreed," Crandall said. "I'll have a proposal to you by Thursday," she said. Crandall nodded, looked between her and Nathan, looked back at her. "You saved me a significant problem today," he said. "I don't forget that." He walked away. Nathan looked at Evelyn. She was staring at the space where Crandall had been, her expression still composed, but her hands, he noticed her hands were pressed flat against her sides, the way a person holds themselves perfectly still when something enormous has just happened and they are not yet ready to let it out. "Evelyn," he said quietly. She turned to look at him, and for one unguarded moment he saw it, the full weight of what this meant, the fear that had been underneath all of it, The months and years of being dismissed and overlooked and underestimated, and now this. "We should head back before dark," she said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were bright. Nathan nodded. They rode back toward Harlow Ridge as the sky turned gold and red behind them side by side, and neither of them said much. But the silence between them had a different quality now. Not empty, not careful, but full of something they were both still finding words for. The ranch that came into view at the end of that road looked the same as it always had, but it wasn't, and they both knew it. The proposal took Evelyn 2 days to write. Nathan watched her work on it the way he'd watched her work on everything with total focus. Nothing wasted, every decision deliberate. She drafted it once, read it back to herself with her lips moving slightly, crossed out half of it, and started again. She asked Nathan 3 questions over the course of those 2 days, each one specific and practical. What was the ranch's realistic labor capacity? If the cattle work ran normally alongside the contract, what was the minimum monthly revenue number that would allow them to begin paying down the bank debt on an accelerated schedule, and how much could they spend on additional tools and materials without creating a cash flow problem in the short term? He answered all 3 questions honestly, including the parts that were uncomfortable to say out loud. She wrote the numbers down without comment, folded them into her calculation, and kept writing. On Thursday morning, she rode to the railroad camp with the finished proposal in her leather bag, and Nathan stayed at the ranch and tried to work and did a poor job of it. Holt found him in the tack room reorganizing things that didn't need reorganizing. "She'll be fine," Holt said. "You said that last time." "I was right last time." Nathan put down the bridle he'd been holding for 5 minutes without doing anything with it. "The numbers in that proposal are aggressive," he said. "If Crandall counters low, she'll have to decide on the spot whether to hold the line or take less than we need. And if she takes less than we need—" "She knows the numbers better than either of us," Holt said. "I know she does." "Then trust that," Holt said. "You've trusted everything else she's done." Nathan looked at him. "This is different." "Why?" He didn't answer right away, not because he didn't know, but because the answer was more personal than practical, and he wasn't sure he was ready to hand it to Holt yet. "Because now there's more to lose," he said finally. Holt was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I know." He left Nathan alone with that which was either a kindness or the opposite of one. "Narration." She came back at midday. Nathan was in the yard. He'd stopped pretending he wasn't waiting. Evelyn rode in at a steady pace, dismounted cleanly, handed off the horse, and walked toward him. Her face was composed. Her face was always composed. He'd stopped trying to read it from a distance because it never told him anything until she was close enough to see her eyes. He watched her eyes. "He countered," she said. Nathan's chest tightened. "How far down?" "He didn't counter down," she said. "He countered with an expanded scope." Nathan stared at her. "He wants more work done. He wants to add the secondary equipment fleet to the contract," she said. "Survey instruments, smaller tool assemblies, assessment and maintenance of the camp's structural hardware." She paused. "It's more work than we proposed, but the monthly retainer he's offering reflects the expanded scope." "How much more?" She told him the number. Nathan was very still for a moment. "Say that again," he said. She said it again. He looked at her. She was watching him with that particular expression she had when she was giving someone time to process something without rushing them. "That's—" He stopped, ran the number through the debt schedule in his head, rough and fast. "Evelyn, if that holds for 6 months, the bank debt has a viable payoff path before the end of next year," she said. "If we manage the operational costs correctly and the railroad contract runs its expected duration." The words landed in his chest like something physical. End of next year. Paid off. Done. 3 weeks ago, he'd been talking to Frost about foreclosure proceedings. "Did you accept?" he said. "I told him I needed to discuss the scope expansion with my partner before committing," she said. Partner. The word registered, and he filed it away and didn't remark on it, because something in him recognized that remarking on it would make her take it back or qualify it, and he didn't want that. "Do we have the capacity?" he said instead. "If we bring on 2 additional hands for the contract work specifically, yes," she said. "I've already identified 2 candidates in town who have the right skills. Both are currently underemployed. We can offer fair wages and they'll come." "You've already done that." "I identified them," she said. "I haven't approached them. That was your call to make." He looked at her. "You could have made it." "It's your ranch," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "It's our ranch," he said. Her expression changed. Just slightly. Just enough. "Go tell Crandall yes," Nathan said. The news traveled fast, the way news always traveled in small territories, where people had few secrets and a great deal of curiosity about their neighbors. By the following week, 3 other ranchers in the valley had heard about the Harlow Ridge maintenance contract with the railroad camp. By the week after that, 2 of them had sent word asking if Evelyn could come look at their equipment. She brought this to Nathan one evening at the kitchen table, laying the 2 inquiry letters in front of him without comment. He read them, looked up. "Neighboring ranches," he said. "Yes," she said. "They want to pay us to assess and maintain their equipment." "That's what they're asking, yes." He looked at the letters again. "This is a separate business from the ranch. It could be," she said, "or it could be structured as a service the ranch offers that generates additional revenue without requiring us to expand the cattle operation." She paused. "There are 2 ways to grow, Nathan. You can get bigger or you can get more efficient and let the efficiency create space for new things. We've been doing the second. This is the second creating space. If we say yes to both of these, we'll need the workshop properly equipped," she said. "Right now we're working out of the barn, which is functional but limiting. A dedicated workspace would increase capacity and quality." She hesitated for the first time. "That requires investment." "How much?" she told him. It was not a small number. Not a dangerous number. Not anymore. Not with the railroad retainer coming in. But not a number you spent without thinking about it. Nathan thought about it. He thought about Frost's face the day Evelyn had laid out the ledgers. He thought about Denny Walsh learning to re-stitch a throat latch. He thought about Pete Garner saying all right in the barn, and Briggs saying everything you touched held, and Crandall looking between him and Evelyn and directing the real conversation to her. "Build the workshop," he said. Evelyn looked at him. "Full budget," he said. "Do it right the first time." Something warm moved through her expression, brief and real. "I'll have specifications drawn up by the end of the week," she said. Gerald Frost rode out again on a Tuesday morning, and this time Nathan saw him coming and didn't feel the clench of dread in his stomach. That alone felt like a kind of victory. Frost came into the house and sat across from the ledger spread that Evelyn had already laid out. She had a way of always being half a step ahead of the situation, always having the paperwork ready before someone asked for it, and he worked through the numbers in silence for a good 10 minutes. Then he sat back. "You signed a maintenance retainer with the Crandall Railroad camp," he said. "We did," Nathan said. "And you have 2 neighboring properties requesting services." "We do." Frost looked at the ledger. Then he looked at Evelyn. Then he looked at Nathan. 3 months ago," Frost said slowly, "I was preparing the foreclosure paperwork." "I know," Nathan said. "I want to be clear," Frost said, "that I am not a man who is easily surprised." A pause. "Miss Harper," Frost said, turning to Evelyn directly, which was something he had not done in their first meeting. "What is your projection for the debt retirement timeline?" Evelyn answered him with the same figures she'd given Nathan, clear specifics supported by the ledger columns she'd marked in pencil for exactly this conversation. Frost was quiet for a moment. "If you maintain this trajectory," he said, "and the railroad contract holds its expected duration, we retire the primary debt inside 14 months, Evelyn said, "with a reserve buffer established by month 9. Frost looked at her for a long moment with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. "I'll restructure the repayment schedule to reflect the new capacity," Frost said finally. "More favorable terms. You've earned them." He stood, gathered his things, and paused at the door. "You came here as a seamstress," he said to Evelyn, and it wasn't quite a question. "I came here as a wife." She said the same answer she'd given Pete Garner weeks ago, the same even tone. The ranch needed more than sewing. Frost looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded once with something that was fully respect this time, no qualification around it. The door closed behind him. Nathan let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 years. Evelyn was already making a note in the ledger. "You're not going to acknowledge that," he said. "Acknowledge what? Gerald Frost just restructured our loan and tipped his hat to you on the way out." She kept writing, but the corner of her mouth moved, just slightly. "I noticed," she said. The workshop broke ground 2 weeks later. Nathan had expected the ranch hands to treat it as just another construction job, dig here, frame there, done. Instead, something unexpected happened. The men showed up before they were scheduled to. Pete Garner came in on his day off without being asked. Denny Walsh worked 3 hours past the end of his shift 3 days running, and when Nathan told him he didn't have to, Denny just looked at him and said, "It's going to have her name on it, isn't it?" Nathan looked at him. "What?" "The workshop," Denny said. "It should have her name on it." Nathan hadn't thought about it. He thought about it now. "Yeah," he said. "It should." He told Evelyn that evening. She went very still. "It's a working building," she said. "It's her building," Nathan said. "Nathan." "Denny's idea," he said. "I just agreed with it." She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Nathan started to wonder if he'd said something wrong. "Nobody has ever put my name on anything," she said. Her voice was entirely steady, but it was the careful kind of steady, the kind a person uses when they need their voice to be steady. "Then it's time," he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her. The kitchen was quiet around them, the candle burning between them, the way it always did in these late evening conversations that had become the rhythm of his days without him ever consciously deciding they would be. "Thank you," she said. It was a small thing to say for something that large, but he understood that it wasn't a small thing at all. The week the workshop was finished, the first neighboring ranch payment came in. It wasn't a large amount, a 2-day assessment job, straightforward workfare compensation. But Nathan stood in the main room looking at that figure entered into the ledger in Evelyn's precise handwriting and felt something he hadn't felt in so long. It took him a moment to identify it. Pride. Not the desperate defending kind of pride that had kept him going through 3 years of drought. The real kind. The kind that comes not from surviving, but from building something. He found Evelyn in the new workshop organizing the tool inventory with the systematic thoroughness she brought to everything, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before she heard him. She was moving with an efficiency that had become familiar to him now. No wasted motion, no hesitation, everything in its place. But there was something else today. Something lighter in how she held herself. She was humming very quietly, barely audible, and she stopped the moment she realized he was there. "Don't stop," he said. She turned. "I wasn't aware I was doing it." "I know," he said. "That's why I said don't stop." She looked at him with that expression he'd come to know, the one where she wasn't sure whether to be amused or guarded, and settled somewhere between both. He walked into the workshop and looked around at what she'd built here. Not just the physical space, the whole of it. The organized system, the labeled inventory, the repair log already started on the wall hook, the sense that this room knew what it was for and was ready to do it. "Tell me something," he said. "What?" "When you were on that stagecoach," he said, "reading the county agricultural reports." She gave him a look. "Did you know what you were going to find here?" She was quiet for a moment. "I knew what kind of problems a ranch in drought territory would likely have," she said. "I'd seen it before. Not cattle specifically, but the pattern. Reactive management. Deferred maintenance. Record keeping that falls behind when people are stressed. She paused. I didn't know the specifics, but you came prepared anyway. I always come prepared, she said. It's the only thing I've ever been able to count on completely. He looked at her. Me, you mean, he said. Preparing yourself. It's not a sad thing, she said quickly. I didn't say it was sad. I said it was... He stopped. It's lonely is what I was going to say. She was very still for a moment. I'm not... She started. I know you're not complaining, he said. I know you're not asking for anything. That's not what I mean. He moved a step closer, and she didn't step back, which he noticed. I mean that you've been the only reliable thing in your own life for a long time, and you've been good at it, and it's worked. But it's also meant you carried everything alone. He paused. You don't have to do that here. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. The workshop was quiet around them. Outside, somewhere across the yard, one of the hands was laughing at something, and the sound of it drifted through the afternoon air like it belonged there. I'm still figuring out how to do that, she said quietly. Not carry it alone. So am I, he said. She looked at him. Really looked at him the way she sometimes did when she'd set aside the composed efficiency and was just present, just herself, direct and real. We could figure it out at the same time, she said. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was a practical suggestion delivered in her practical voice with the smallest trace of warmth behind it. It was, Nathan thought, the most Evelyn thing she had ever said. Yeah, he said. I think we could. 2 months after the railroad contract was signed, a letter arrived from the county land office. Nathan almost didn't read it immediately. Mail had a way of being either irrelevant or bad, and he'd learned to manage his energy. But Evelyn picked it up from the stack, looked at the return address, and handed it directly to him. Open it, she said. He opened it. It was a notice that 2 properties adjacent to Harlow Ridge, small parcels that had been abandoned during the worst of the drought years, had come available for purchase at county auction. First right of refusal went to the nearest operating ranch. That was Harlow Ridge. Nathan read it twice. We can't afford to expand right now, he said. Not both parcels, Evelyn said. She'd been reading over his shoulder, which he'd stopped noticing she did weeks ago. But the east parcel, the one with the river bottom access, we can afford that. Barely, but within margin. River bottom, he said. The most productive soil in this valley, she said. You mentioned it yourself the first day. You said most ranchers aren't using it correctly. He turned to look at her. You remember that, he said. I remember everything you said about this land, she said. From the first week. He stared at her. She'd been cataloging his own words, filing them, keeping them available, not for any manipulative purpose, just because that was how her mind worked, always building a larger picture from all the available pieces. That parcel adds how much to our hay production, if we work it correctly, he asked. Based on soil yield averages for this region and what I've been able to estimate about current rainfall recovery. She paused, pulled the number out of her head the way she always did, clean and immediate. Enough to cut our feed purchasing costs by somewhere between 30% and 40% annually, plus we'd have surplus to sell in good years. Nathan looked at the letter. He thought about his father breaking this land with his hands. He thought about 3 years of drought and Frost's cedar-smelling office and the letter he'd written to a marriage agency, asking for someone to mend his curtains. He thought about the woman standing beside him, who had arrived with leather working tools and accounting ledgers and had proceeded to save everything he thought was already gone. Submit the bid, he said. Evelyn took the letter from his hand. I'll have it in tomorrow's mail, she said. The bid was accepted 3 weeks later. Holt was the one who brought the confirmation letter out to where Nathan was working, and he stood there while Nathan read it with an expression on his face that was as close to openly emotional as Silas Holt ever allowed himself to get. Your father bought this ranch in 1861, Holt said. He did, Nathan said. He'd have something to say right now. He would, Nathan said. Most of it unrepeatable. Holt laughed, a rare, real sound, not his usual dry grunt. "She going to keep surprising us?" Holt asked. Nathan folded the letter, looked out across the land. "Every single day," he said. "I'm counting on it." That evening he found Evelyn at the kitchen table. Her usual spot, her usual candle, but the ledger in front of her was the new one. The one she'd started the week the railroad contract was signed. The one where the numbers ran in a direction that still felt almost impossible to believe. Upward. He sat across from her without being invited, which had stopped requiring an invitation sometime around the 6th week, and she looked up and then back down at the ledger without comment, which meant she was comfortable with it. He watched her write. "The East parcel bid was accepted," he said. She looked up. "I know," he said. "Holt told me, which means you already know too because you heard Holt's horse before I did." The corner of her mouth moved. "I heard it," she confirmed. "And you didn't come out." "You looked like you needed a moment," she said. He looked at her. That quality again, the one he'd noticed so many times now, the way she paid attention not just to the practical details of things, but to the human ones. To what people needed, to what to give them and what to leave them. "Evelyn," he said. She waited. "None of this exists without you," he said. "Not the railroad contract, not the workshop, not this land bid, none of it. You built the foundation," she said. "I built a foundation that was sinking," he said. "You're the reason it holds." She looked at him steadily, and something in her eyes was different tonight. Not the careful composure, not the focused efficiency, but something more open, more present, more like the woman he'd caught glimpses of in the unguarded moments. "I needed this too," she said quietly. "I want you to know that. This wasn't only about saving your ranch. I needed somewhere that—" She stopped. "That what?" he said. She looked down at the ledger for a moment, then back up. "Somewhere that needed what I actually have," she said. "Not what people expected me to have. Not what was convenient for me to be." A pause. "Somewhere that needed exactly this." The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan reached across the table and covered her hand with his one deliberate, unhurried gesture. Nothing rushed about it. She looked down at their hands, didn't move. "It does," he said, "and so do I." When she looked up, the brightness in her eyes that he'd seen at the railroad camp after Crandall walked away was back, and this time she didn't blink it down or turn away or reach for the ledger. She just looked at him, and the candle burned steady between them, and outside the window, the first stars were coming out over Harlow Ridge, and for the first time in nearly 5 years, Nathan Cole felt the future arriving instead of retreating. Not because someone had fixed his clothes, because someone had shown him that what he thought was broken was only waiting for someone who knew how to look at it right. The curtains were finished on the 23rd of December. Evelyn hung them herself early in the morning before anyone else was up, and when Nathan came into the main room and saw them, he stopped in the doorway and stood there long enough that she turned around to see what the problem was. "No problem," he said. "Just looking." She looked at the curtains, then at him. "They're curtains, Nathan." "They're the curtains I asked for in a letter 6 months ago," he said, "when I thought that was the most important thing I needed." She turned back to straightening the hem on the left panel. "And now?" "Now I know better," he said. She didn't respond to that directly, but he saw the line of her shoulders shift slightly, that small, involuntary softening. She still did when something landed closer than she'd planned for. She'd gotten better at letting him see it. He'd gotten better at not making a production of it. They had both been learning these past months. Different things at different speeds, but in the same direction. Christmas at Harlow Ridge that year was louder than it had been in a long time. Holt had said something to the hands about it being a different kind of year, and they'd taken that as license to celebrate accordingly. Someone produced a fiddle. Pete Garner, who it turned out had a singing voice completely inconsistent with his personality, led 3 rounds of something that wasn't quite a carol and wasn't quite a drinking song, but landed somewhere useful between both. Denny Walsh attempted to teach the 2 new hands the throat latch stitching technique by firelight, which was not the appropriate venue for it, but demonstrated better than anything else how completely the culture of this place had changed. Evelyn moved through all of it with the particular grace of someone who had not grown up with large celebrations and was discovering, somewhat to her own surprise, that she didn't mind them. Nathan watched her from across the room most of the evening. He watched her listen to Pete's singing with an expression that started as politely neutral and ended as genuinely amused. He watched her answer a question from one of the new hands, Carson 26 quick learner, with the same patient precision she brought to every explanation, and watched Carson nod with the focused attention of someone who understood he was being given something valuable. He watched her accept a cup of hot cider from Denny and say something that made Denny laugh the real way, not the polite way. She was at home here. Maybe she didn't fully know it yet, but he could see it. Holt appeared at his elbow sometime around 9 o'clock. "Stop staring," Holt said. "I'm not staring," Nathan said. "You've been watching her for 45 minutes, Holt said. "In my experience, that's either staring or the early stages of a medical episode. You look healthy enough so." Nathan drank his cider. "I'm going to ask her," Nathan said. "Properly." Holt was quiet for a moment. "The ring question or the future question?" Holt said. "Both," Nathan said. "They're the same question." Holt looked at Evelyn across the room, then back at Nathan. "Don't make a speech," Holt said. "She doesn't like speeches. She likes direct." "I know," Nathan said. "And don't do it tonight," Holt said. "Too much noise. She'll want quiet for something like that." Nathan looked at him. "When did you become an expert on what Evelyn wants?" "I've been watching both of you for 6 months," Holt said flatly. "Someone had to pay attention while you were busy falling in love with the ranch's operational efficiency." Nathan opened his mouth, closed it. Holt walked away looking satisfied. The week between Christmas and the New Year was quieter, the way that week always is, a pause between what just ended and what hasn't started yet. The ranch ran on a lighter schedule. The workshop stayed closed for 3 days, which Evelyn accepted only after Nathan pointed out that the men needed rest, and the equipment would still be broken in January. She spent part of those 3 days doing something he hadn't seen her do before. She wrote letters. He saw them on the kitchen table. Several of them sealed and addressed in her small, precise handwriting, and he didn't ask because she'd tell him if she wanted him to know. On the second day, she said unprompted, "I'm writing to women I know from Missouri, from Kansas City, 2 from the harness shop." She paused, "Telling them about the work we're doing here, in case any of them are looking for a different situation." He looked at her. "The workshop needs to expand in the spring," she said. "When the railroad protocol is implemented and the neighboring ranch contracts grow, we'll need 2 more skilled people at minimum. And I'd rather bring in people I know can do the work than spend 3 months figuring out whether a stranger can." Nathan nodded slowly. "Makes sense." "It also means," she said, "that this place will have women working in it, doing the same work the men do for the same wages." She looked at him directly when she said that. It wasn't a challenge exactly. It was a door she was opening, watching to see how he'd walk through it. "That was always the plan, wasn't it?" he said. "What you told me. What you wanted to build." "I wanted to know if you'd remembered," she said. "I remembered everything you said about what you wanted to build," he said. "Same as you remembered everything I said about this land." She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her letters, but the set of her shoulders had changed again, that softening, less guarded now than it used to be. He sat across from her and read the agricultural report from the county extension office that had been sitting unread for 2 weeks, and they spent the afternoon like that, quiet and companionable, and easy in each other's presence, in the way that takes time to build and can't be faked. He asked her on the 28th of December, not with a speech, not with fanfare. The way he did most things that mattered, directly after thinking it through completely when the moment presented itself and he was ready. They were in the workshop. She was finalizing the second draft of the railroad protocol documentation, and he was repairing a bridle that needed attention, and the only sound was the scratch of her pen and the creak of leather under his hands, and it was so ordinary and so exactly right that it clarified something he'd been turning over for weeks. "Evelyn," he said. She said, still writing. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, not practically." She put the pen down and looked at him. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as a business partner, not as the person managing the accounts. As my wife, a real one. The kind that chose it and means it and isn't going anywhere." She was very still. "I know how this started," he said. "I know what the letter said and what the arrangement was. I know you came here on terms that had nothing to do with what this became. And I'm not asking you to pretend the practical part doesn't exist, because it does, and you built most of it, and it's good and real." He paused. "But the practical part isn't the reason I want you to stay. I want you to stay because this place is better with you in it. I am better with you in it. And I hope that you know that." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. He waited. He'd learned to wait for her. She thought before she spoke, and everything she said meant exactly what it said, and he had come to value that more than he knew how to express. "You said honestly," she said, "not practically." "Yes," he said. "Honestly," she said. "I stopped thinking of this as a temporary arrangement sometime around the 5th week." He looked at her. "The Axel housing," she said. "When Pete said all right, I thought this is what it could be. A place where the right answer wins, regardless of who gives it." She paused. "I started thinking of it as mine then, which frightened me, because it wasn't." "It is," he said. "I know that now," she said. "Is that a yes?" he said. The corner of her mouth moved. "That was me being honest instead of practical," she said. "The practical answer is also yes." He crossed the workshop in 3 steps, and she stood up, and he took her face in both hands with the careful certainty of a man who had thought about this moment and knew exactly what he wanted it to be. And she reached up and held his wrists the way she held everything directly, without hesitation, certain. He kissed her. She kissed him back. Outside, the winter held the ranch in its cold, quiet grip, and inside the workshop, with her name on the side of it, something that had started as a desperate letter from a man who thought he needed curtains, became exactly what it was always going to be if you were willing to wait for it and work for it and see it clearly. January arrived with the cold and with Douglas Hart's formal written agreement delivered by Ryder on the 3rd day of the new year. Evelyn read it at the kitchen table while Nathan stood behind her, and she read it twice before she set it down, which meant it was significant. She usually only needed to read something once. "The scope is larger than what we discussed in December," she said. "Good larger or complicated larger," he said. "Both," she said. "He's added 2 additional camps to the initial implementation, and he wants the full protocol documentation delivered by March 1st. She looked at the timeline on the 2nd page. "That's aggressive." "Can you do it?" She looked at the document. Her jaw was set in the particular way it got when she was measuring something difficult against her own capacity and trying to be honest about the result. "If Carson is as good as he's been showing," she said, "and if the women from Kansas City come, one of them specifically Ruth, she kept freight records for 3 years and picks things up fast, then yes. With that help, March 1st is possible." "Then tell Hart yes," Nathan said. "It's a significant commitment," she said. "You've made significant commitments before," he said. "You got on a stagecoach to Montana based on a letter from a man you'd never met." She looked up at him. "This is better odds than that was," he said. She looked back at the document. "Significantly better odds," she agreed, and picked up her pen. The letter to Ruth went out the next day. Ruth's reply arrived in under 2 weeks, which suggested she had been waiting for exactly this kind of offer without knowing it was coming. She could be in Montana by February, she wrote. She had 2 questions: what the wages were, and whether she'd be expected to pretend she didn't know things in order to make the men around her more comfortable. Evelyn read this letter to Nathan at the table. He listened to the second question twice. "What did you write back?" he said. "I told her the wages," Evelyn said, "and I told her that nobody at Harlow Ridge had made that particular requirement of me, and she could expect the same." Nathan nodded. "Good answer." "I also told her to bring her freight records," Evelyn said, "because we're building the protocol documentation, and her real-world data is more useful than theory." Nathan looked at her. "You're building a team," he said. "I'm building what comes after me," she said quietly. He understood what she meant. Not that she was leaving the opposite of that. She was thinking past herself, past the immediate work, past the current season, to the thing that would still be standing and growing long after the urgency of the present had become the ordinary of the future. That was how she thought. Always the longer view. Always the structure underneath the structure. "You told me in December," he said, "that you wanted to build something that lasts." "I remember," she said. "This is that," he said. "What you're building right now, this is exactly that." She looked at him for a moment, with that expression she still sometimes got, the unguarded one. The one that remembered what it felt like to be the woman waiting in a Kansas City boarding house for letters that didn't come back. "I know," she said softly. He reached across and covered her hand, and she didn't look down at their hands anymore the way she used to. She just let it be natural and unhurried the way a thing is when it belongs where it is. Whoa. Ruth arrived on the 14th of February. She was 40 years old, broad-shouldered, and had a handshake that surprised Carson considerably. She looked at the workshop within 20 minutes of arriving, asked 4 questions that demonstrated she'd read everything Evelyn had sent her in the preparatory letters, and by the end of her first day had correctly identified a load-bearing stress point in one of the neighboring ranch's wagon frames that Evelyn had flagged but not yet had time to document. "She'll do," Pete Garner said to Holt that evening. Holt looked at him. "High praise from you." "She found the stress fracture herself," Pete said, "without being shown. That's the test." Holt thought about a different woman who had walked into their barn 6 months ago and identified problems simply by walking and looking. "History repeating," Holt said. "Good history," Pete said, which was the most generous thing Pete Garner had said about anything in 11 years. And Holt made a mental note to remember the exact date. The protocol documentation was finished on the 26th of February, 3 days before the deadline. Evelyn and Ruth worked the final week in long stretches that went past midnight, cross-referencing every procedure against every piece of field data they had, testing each instruction for clarity by having Carson and Denny attempt to follow it without guidance and noting every point of confusion. By the time they were done, it was the most thorough piece of operational documentation Nathan had ever seen outside of a government office, and it had been built by 2 women in a Montana ranch workshop in the middle of winter. When Evelyn set the final bound copy on the kitchen table, the morning it was finished, she looked at it for a long moment without saying anything. Nathan waited. "My father worked 22 years, she said finally, and at the end of it, he had nothing to show that would outlast him." She touched the cover of the document. "This will still be working in camps along this railroad line when everyone who built it is gone." Her voice was entirely steady. Nathan understood that it cost her something to hold it that steady. "Your name is on the front page," he said. She looked up. "I made sure of it," he said. "Hart's copy, our copy, every copy. Evelyn Harper Cole, Harlow Ridge Ranch." He paused. "Your father's store didn't outlast him. Your work will." She was very still for a moment. Then she said, "Harper Cole." "That's your name," he said. "If you want it." "I want it," she said. Immediate, no hesitation. Something broke open in his chest, warm and full. And he pulled her into him and held her, and she held back with the same directness she brought to everything. And for a long moment, neither of them said a word. The spring came in hard and fast, the way Montana springs do. 1 week ice, the next week mud, then suddenly green, arriving like it had been waiting just past the edge of sight the whole winter long. With the green came growth. The east parcel worked correctly through the early planting window, produced exactly what Evelyn had projected hay yield that cut the feed purchasing costs by 33% and left a surplus worth selling by late summer. The railroad protocol was implemented at the first 2 camps by April, with Hart sending word back that the supervisors had called it the clearest operational document they'd ever been handed. 3 more neighboring ranches signed service agreements. Carson turned out to have a mechanical instinct that nobody had known about until Evelyn handed him a broken survey instrument, and he fixed it in 40 minutes without instruction. Ruth was already training a third person, a young woman from Billings named Ada, who had come asking about work and stayed because the work was real. And the bank debt, the thing that had hung over Harlow Ridge like a permanent weather system for 5 years, was ahead of schedule. Frost came in April, not the weather, the banker, and sat down with the updated ledgers and said in the tone of a man revising his entire understanding of a situation, "You'll be clear by October." "September," Evelyn said. Frost looked at her. "The east parcel hay surplus sells in late August," she said. "At current prices, that accelerates the final payment by 4 to 6 weeks. Frost looked at Nathan. Nathan shrugged. "She's right. She's usually right." Frost looked back at Evelyn. He did that more now, looked at her first. Consulted her directly. Let the conversation be what it actually was, rather than performing the version where Nathan was the primary party. It had taken him 3 visits to make that adjustment completely, but he'd made it. "September," Frost said. "September." Evelyn confirmed. He closed the ledger, and then he said something Nathan hadn't expected. "My daughter," Frost said. He stopped, looked at his hands. "She's been asking about working outside the home. Not teaching, not dressmaking. Something more operational. Her word." He paused. "I've been telling her there aren't opportunities for that kind of work out here." The kitchen was quiet. "Tell her to come talk to me," Evelyn said. Frost looked at her. "I mean it," Evelyn said. "Tell her to come. I'll show her what's here." Nathan watched Gerald Frost, who had nearly foreclosed on this ranch 8 months ago and had ridden out to assess the damage, with the tired certainty of a man confirming what he already knew, sit across from the woman who had changed everything and nod with something that was genuine and a little humbled. "I'll tell her," Frost said. The debt cleared on the 4th of September. Evelyn was in the workshop when the final confirmation came, and Nathan walked out there and stood in the doorway holding the bank's letter, and she looked up and read his face before he said a word. She set down her work. "It's done," he said. She stood up. He crossed the room and handed her the letter. She read it, which was not necessary because she knew every number in it by heart. But she read it anyway, and he understood that she needed to see it in writing. To have the thing be real in the physical, documented, irrefutable way that she trusted most. She held the letter for a moment. Then she looked up at him. Her eyes were bright. "We should tell Holt," she said. "We should," he said. "In a minute." She looked at him. He took the letter gently out of her hands and set it on the workbench, and he held both her hands in his and looked at her. Really looked at her. The full of her, the woman who had arrived with a tool case and an eye for broken things, and had proceeded to fix everything that mattered. "I wrote a letter once asking for someone to sew curtains," he said, "and I got you instead. And I want you to know every single day for the rest of my life, that's the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. Evelyn Harper." Cole looked at him with those steady dark eyes that saw everything missed, nothing, and had looked at a failing ranch and seen not what it was, but what it could be. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah," he said. "The curtains look good," she said. He laughed, the real kind, the full kind, the kind he'd stopped being able to find for 3 years, and that came easily now. She smiled. "The real one, the full one," He pulled her in and held her in the middle of the workshop that bore her name. And outside, the September sun was on the land they'd saved together, and the east pasture was gold, with late-season grass, and somewhere across the yard, Denny Walsh was teaching Ada something she hadn't known before. And Harlow Ridge Ranch stood exactly the way a thing stands when it's been built right, not because the ground was perfect, but because the people who cared for it refused to let it fall.
Chapter.
The women came through that autumn and into the following year. Frost's daughter, whose name was Clara, and who had her father's precision, and her own fierce, quiet stubbornness, arrived in October and proved in her first week that she had a natural aptitude for logistics that Evelyn said reminded her of herself at 24. Ada trained 2 more women from Billings who had heard through the particular telegraph of women's conversations that Harlow Ridge was a place that would teach you what you actually knew and pay you what you were actually worth. Ruth became the lead trainer for new equipment assessors, a role that suited her so completely it seemed like something she'd been designed for. The workshop doubled in size before the second winter. Holt stood looking at the expanded building one morning with the expression he got when something had exceeded his expectations and he hadn't fully adjusted to it yet. "Your father built this ranch with 12 men and a prayer," he said to Nathan. "He did," Nathan said. "You rebuilt it with a woman who counts holes in feed sacks and doesn't stop until the numbers make sense." "I didn't rebuild it," Nathan said. "We did." Holt looked at him. "You're different than you used to be," Holt said. "Better or worse?" Nathan asked. Holt thought about it with his characteristic honesty. "Better," he said. "Considerably." That second winter, on an evening in January, Nathan found Evelyn in the main room. She was sitting by the fireplace, not at the kitchen table, which was itself unusual. She had her sewing in her hands, but she wasn't sewing. She was looking at the fire, and she had the expression she got when she was thinking about something large and was taking her time with it. He sat down beside her. She leaned into him, which she'd started doing the quiet, natural lean of someone who had decided that this was where she belonged and had stopped needing to be careful about showing it. "What are you thinking about?" he said. "Next year," she said. "The year after. What this looks like in 5 years." "Tell me," he said. "More women," she said. "From more places. Not just Montana. I've had 2 letters this month, one from Wyoming, one from Colorado. Women who heard about the work here." She paused. "I think there's something larger possible. A network of some kind. Ranches and operations that are connected. Where information moves between them. Where a woman in Colorado who knows how to read a failing axle housing can find out that a ranch in Montana needs exactly that skill." She stopped. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet." "You'll figure it out," he said. "You always do." She looked up at him. "You say that like it's easy." "I say it like it's true," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "When I was on that stagecoach," she said, "I kept telling myself to have reasonable expectations, that this would be practical, workable, fine." She looked at the fire. "I was prepared for fine." "And," he said. She looked up at him, and the fire was warm on her face, and everything she felt was visible in it. Not the composed efficiency, not the careful control, just Evelyn fully present, fully real. "This is not fine," she said. He smiled. "No. This is—" She stopped, found the word. "This is what I didn't know to hope for." He put his arm around her and she leaned in, and the fire burned steady in the grate, and the ranch was quiet around them, and outside the stars were brilliant and cold over the land they had saved and built, and intended to keep building for as long as they both had strength left for it. Nathan Cole had written a letter asking for someone to mend what was torn. What arrived instead was someone who knew that the real work was never mending what was torn. It was building something strong enough that it wouldn't tear again. She had done exactly that. And Harlow Ridge Ranch stood and would keep standing as proof of what becomes possible when someone looks at a broken thing and sees not the ending, but the beginning of something far better than what came before.